Tennessee Geographic Information Council is a 30-year-old nonprofit organization. And we've joined forces with the Tennessee State Data Center and Mr. Tim Kuhn to bring you this very timely and informative webinar about the current 2020 census data. Tim Kuhn is the director of the Tennessee State Data Center, housed at the University of Tennessee Knoxville campus. He's arranged this speaker and webinar for us to see firsthand how our census data, to see it and how it compares to historical census data throughout the years. This should be really educational for everyone involved, and I'm super excited to see it. However, first I have a few announcements. On behalf of the Tennessee Geographic Information Council, I want to thank everyone that attended our virtual fall conference last month. We had over 300 people attend over 2 days, and the feedback we received was very gracious. We hope that you found the conference informative and worthwhile. So our goal was to provide a current and new members with a conference that felt familiar and fresh in a brand new environment. So your attendance, participation, and enthusiasm make these events successful. And so be sure to stay tuned for our annual conference in April of 2021. And if you are new to TNGIC and would like to become a member, please visit our website at tngic.org/membership to sign up. And also, there are ample opportunities to pitch in with committees, volunteering, and it makes for so much more of a gratifying experience with our organization if you do. So please consider getting involved. And with that said, I'd like to introduce to you the person that made this happen, the person behind all the data at the State Data Center, Mr. Tim Kuhn. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that introduction. And I'd like to welcome not just the TNGIC members, but those of you who typically run with the State Data Center in our webinar series or attend our annual conference each fall. This is our replacement, and it's the third in our series of webinars. We really do appreciate everyone that's here today. Whether you're from TNGIC, whether you're through the State Data Center, or even some of the national, we threw this out to the National State Data Center Network, and we've got people coming on this webinar from 4 corners of the country, up in Massachusetts, New York, California, Washington. So we want to thank everybody who joined up today. As I said, this is our third in our fall series of webinars. We discussed data.census.gov. A few months ago, we had a redistricting webinar with James Whitehorn from the Census Bureau, from the redistricting office, and Matthew Hill from the Tennessee State Comptroller. Just a quick update today, we learned that the geographic files for the 2020 census will be released starting January 22nd, and it sounds like on a flow basis by February 28th, all the states will have some 2020 census geographic data products. But we're still waiting on the final word of when the 2020 census data itself will be released. We understand that it's still kind of to be determined, but as close as possible to the April 1st statutory deadline. So we'll continue to wait and stand by. Sign up for our newsletter or follow us on Twitter or Facebook if you want to keep up to date on that. We're going to try to continue this webinar series probably after the new year. So that's another reason to sign up for our newsletter, keep up to date on what's going to be coming down the pike. And with that, I think we're ready to hand this over to Jonathan Schroeder. Jonathan is from the IPUMS at the University of Minnesota. Jonathan is a geographer at the IPUMS Center for Data Integration, and he serves as a project manager and senior researcher for the IPUMS NHGIS. He leads the development of Crosswalks, time series, and other resources at NHGIS. He also contributes to the IPUMS USA project by leading development of integrated geographic variables for the US and census microdata. And we're very fortunate to have him here. He's going to put a quiver in our arrows. He's going to give us another tool, something that we can use to expand our capabilities, and that's really what this is all about. So Jonathan, on behalf of everyone who's here, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Tim. Let me get my screen shared here. Here it is. You see the title screen now?
Yep.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. It's really a pleasure to have this chance to present to all of you. My name again is Jonathan Schroeder. I apologize to Tim. I forgot to remind him that I use that pronunciation of Schroeder. It varies across the country everywhere I go, but that's how my family chose to do it. I'll be talking today about IPUMS NHGIS. The ordering of my subtitle is also the order of my talk. I'll start with a basic introduction to our core products, our general Geographic US Census data that's available. And then I'm going to spend most of my talk talking about time series and crosswalks, a couple of products that we have to make it easier to analyze census data, geographic census data across time. So to get started, the basics of NHGIS, we are one of several different IPUMS data projects. IPUMS, if you're wondering, is kind of like Esri now. It doesn't stand for any words. The words that it did stand for don't really apply to everything it is now. So we just say IPUMS. Why do we say IPUMS and not IPUMS? Because the I used to stand for integrated. And that's still what we're about. We're about integrating census and survey data in making it easier to compare across different sources. So with US Census data, we collect US Census data across all time. We have microdata. Most of our projects are census microdata. They're individual and household level responses to the census, anonymized. That generally doesn't have a lot of geographic detail in it because it needs to be anonymous and privacy protected. So NHGIS is our project to provide real refined geographic detail. And in NHGIS, that's the National Historical Geographic Information System. That's where we provide small area census data for the US going all the way back to the first census, 1790. We have both US census and survey data. We have some products that are not census. We have both summary tables and GIS files so that you can download the counts and boundaries and map data from any census all the way back to 1790. The 1790 boundaries that we have are only for counties and states. Starting in 1910, we have census tract data available. And so you can see some examples of the census tract boundaries here for 1940. And 1910 was the first census that had tract data. Through time, they gradually added more cities. So in 1990, you can get the whole country, but as you go farther back in time, it's more and more limited to a smaller set of cities. And we have today, for contemporary censuses, we have all summary levels in our system all the way down to census blocks. So if you're looking for the smallest possible geographic information, you can get that through NHGIS. In fact, we have block tables back to 1970, and we have block boundaries back to 1990. Alternatives to get this out of the way. You're probably familiar with the new census data dissemination site, data.census.gov. If you're like me, you're still not so sure about why we needed this instead of American Fact Finder. It's got some new features and some new utility, but it also is quite a pain for some common use tasks, including getting lots of data for lots of areas. And that's one thing that NHGIS is good for. And the census website has never provided data for historical censuses in machine readable form. So that's another key difference for NHGIS. There's another site that's a commercial website called Social Explorer you may be familiar with. And they have actually used NHGIS boundaries to support online mapping. NHGIS is not an online mapping tool or an online analysis tool. NHGIS is a data repository where you can request customized data files and then download the data and analyze it with your own local tooling, but we don't have the online resources. Social Explorer is a unique site that actually allows you to do online mapping of historical data. The catch is that it is a pay for, it is a pay service, so you do have to pay for it. It may be available at your institution, but there are still some things that NHGIS has to offer that Social Explorer does not. We are the only source of GIS files for these historical boundaries. Social Explorer only allows you to map them online, but not download them. Our data access system is what I call a universal data filtering and selection system. This means that you can filter and explore all years, levels, and data types all at once and request data from any years or any levels for a single request. We provide a nationwide extent for all of our data, and that's both a pro and a con. A lot of people come in looking for, well, I only want Tennessee data. Well, for most of our levels, you'll get a nationwide file, and you'll have to select out the data that you're looking for. That simplifies our interface. We do hope to add more extent selection of, ability in the future. There are some exceptions for block and block group data. We allow state level selection, and census block boundaries are only available by state, just for the, to keep the file size smaller. We have complete 1970 through 2010 summary file data. This includes those oddball summary files 2 and 4. If you remember the 2000 and earlier data, those special summary files had characteristic iterations. They broke down census tables by lots of different races and ethnicities. So if you need detailed data for specific race or ethnic groups or specific geographic areas, we have that. We also have a variety of other types of historical data, vital statistics, agriculture, businesses, religious bodies. We also have time series tables and crosswalks, which is what I am here to talk about today. I'm really sorry. My system has a bad habit of sometimes just closing the view on one of my screens, so I'm going to have to take a second to fix that. All right, I'm back in business. And let's see here. All right, I hope you can all see.
Not yet, John.
Where we left off. All right, let me share my screen again, maybe. All right, now?
Yep, that's working.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. The last thing and most important thing maybe is that it is all free. We are funded by federal grants, so it is your tax dollars at work. But if you come to our site, all you need to do is register, and you're able to access all this data as much as you like. All right, so a quick walkthrough. This is our main page. Through this page, nhgis.org, if you want to find our data and start viewing things, you can just click on this button right in the middle of the page, and that brings you to our data finder. Initially, you don't see any of the available data. You have to begin by selecting filters that will narrow the range of data that you'll be viewing. So for example, here I've selected the journey to work topic, and now this lists all of the different tables and other data that we have available for this subject. At the top of this list, I'm looking at 1960 tract data because this is sorted chronologically. But if I click on the popularity column, then I'm sorting by what is the most popular tables for users who have selected similar filters. So this screenshot is a few years old, but we have the most recent ACS 5-year data available, and that is often the most popular source of data. So that helps you find the tables that are most likely to be of interest to you by sorting on popularity, and that brings them to the top very quickly. Over here, we have GIS boundary files. Now this is going to list all of the boundary files that are associated with units for which journey to work data was reported. So we have journey to work data for 1960 census tracts. That's the earliest unit for which we have that. So that's the earliest shapefile that's listed here. We have a couple different types. corresponding to different versions of the census's Tigerline files. And that's about all I want to say about these core products. Maybe there'll be time for to answer questions later, but I really do want to focus on time series and crosswalks the rest of the way. So about those. A time series table in NHGIS is a data product that joins together data from multiple censuses in a single table. And for example, this is a downloaded time series table file for population by marital status by sex. So the first 6 columns here are all reporting counts of male never married, and this is for states. And you can see each column corresponds to a different year, and the last one includes margins of error because we're using ACS 5-year data for the last year. Up on top, we have coding that indicates these columns are all part of a single time series for male never married. And then over here, we start a new time series for male now married. And then as you scroll across, you'll see more time series. This particular layout is one of 3 that we have available. This is the time varies by column layout. We also have a time varies by row layout where each column is a different time series and then the years vary across the rows. And we also have a time varies by file layout where this is the 1970 file and then the later years would each be in their own separate files. Our data, when you download them, they come with a code book that describes exactly what the contents are. So if you're wondering what those codes stand for, you can see that here. You scroll down and at the bottom, we even indicate exactly what our source data was. And this highlights one of the things that we've done to put this data together that was a pretty significant undertaking is we had to, in many cases, identify groups of historical variables that need to be summed together in order to make consistent statistics across time. So in order to get a count of all males who are married, in 1970, you actually have to sum up several different counts for different age groups. And we've already done that. We have created metadata on our system that identifies how these correspond to these different time series, and then our system has generated the counts by summing those up. So back in our system here, if you click on any of these table names when you're viewing these things, you can see exactly what the time series are available for that time series table. Here, this again, I've selected the Journey to Work topic. There are 7 time series tables, and you'll see there are 3 here at the top that are means of transportation to work. They differ in the number of years they cover and in which categories are available for means of transportation to work. So another thing we've done is for each time range, we've identified the finest grouping, finest categorization of a subject that you can possibly produce. So going back to 1970, you can only get 9 categories of means of transportation to work. But if you go back to 1980, you can get 18. And here's the time series table that goes back to 1980 and the 18 categories. But here's the 9 categories that you can get back to 1970. And if you scroll down, and you'll also see exactly where the source of each of these statistics came from, and you'll get some additional notes about how these concepts changed over time. So the universe for working age differs a little between 70 and 80, and we had to make some choices about how to match up 1970 concepts of means of transportation with later years. And this is all explained here. There's links to the relevant source documentation, and all of this documentation is also available through our main website under the time series table documentation. You can find current table details here, and down at the bottom there's a PDF that has all of the time series table details in there. So if you're ever curious about how these concepts really match up across time or why we did what we did, that is documented. The last big thing to talk about here, and this is really going to dominate the rest of my discussion, there's a couple of different ways that we have dealt with geographic integration across time. I've already described some of the attribute integration, matching up categories across time, which was a significant undertaking. But we also had to figure out, well, how do we match up tracts from one year with tracts from another year? And we do that in two different ways and produce two different types of time series tables: nominally integrated and geographically standardized. Okay, so in this example that I showed before, this is a nominally integrated table. We have matched across all the columns data from each year that has the same state name. Now, with the state level, that's not a big deal because since 1970, the state boundaries haven't changed. So you're looking at accurate data for Alabama from each census through this entire period. Where it gets weird for nominal integration is when we look at other levels like census tracts, where there have been many changes across time. And here you can see a lot of blank values because in 1970, there was a tract 1502 that disappeared and became 1503 and 1504. And we don't have direct information here about how these two relate to each other across time. We have just matched them up by name or code. What would that be useful for? Well, that's still a useful format if you just want to map snapshots from each time. So here we have 1990% black using 1990 tracts, and here we have 2010% black using 2010 tracts. And that works fine with nominally integrated data. Here's an example of Detroit area poverty rates by county subdivision. This is something you can do with our nominally integrated time series tables. But of course, if you want to measure changes within tracts, you need to match up those boundaries somehow. And here's downtown Minneapolis, where they had some major retracting between 1990 and 2000. So for example, this area that is on the west side of the University of Minnesota campus, there was a very large influx of immigrant Somali population in this area between 1990 and 2000, and it would be very difficult to determine how that population changed given these boundaries. Another example, even at the county level, this is a significant problem. As many of you may know, when you've tried to map county changes between 2000 and 2010, there's this new county, Broomfield County in Colorado, that takes parts of 4 other 2,000 counties to form it. And so exactly how did the population of Boulder County change between 2000 and 2010 is not an easy thing to determine. So we have this other version of our data called geographically standardized time series tables. And in this, we have actually provided estimates for 1990 and 2000 using the 2010 boundaries. So these are actual estimates of the 2010 tracts characteristic all the way down. There are no blanks here. There are also lower and upper bounds on those statistics because these are estimates. And let me show you how that works. We start with census block data for our standardized data. So here is a census tract, a 1990 census tract on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, where it became 7 different 2010 census tracts. And we need 1990 estimates for all of those 7 tracts. Well, we don't start with the 1990 tract, we start with the 1990 blocks. And if you look closely, the light colored block boundaries in these areas match up very well with the 2010 tract boundaries. So in these 5 tracts over here, we have exact 1990 statistics for these 5 2010 tracts. There is a problem over here though. You can see this 2010 tract boundary cuts through 3 1990 blocks. So we don't know where to put those data exactly. We have developed a pretty advanced interpolation model that uses information from the 2000 and 2010 census blocks, and as well as land cover data and some road data to make a good guess about where that is. I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm just going to tell you that on our website, that methodology is thoroughly explained if you're interested. But in the end, in this particular case, we allocated 201 people to this northern tract and 14 to the southern tract. And the catch being that we don't know for sure that 14 people were really on this side of the boundary. So there is a chance that nobody was on that side of the boundary, in which case we'd have a lower bound on this statistic and an upper bound in that one. And it could be that all 215 of those people were on that side of the boundary, in which case we have an upper bound and a lower bound in the other direction. So that's where those numbers come from over in these columns. And that will give you a good sense of how much uncertainty there is in our statistics. So our time series products, currently we have 1990, 2000, and 2010 data for 2010 units. We have that for 10 different geographic levels, including tracts, block groups, cities as places, county subdivisions, congressional districts, etc. That includes 1,600 distinct time series in 109 tables. So a lot of different statistics, but we are limited to the data that is available for census blocks. Because we start from blocks, we only have data on things like race, ethnicity, age, sex, household size. These are the short form statistics that were available for blocks in those census years. What we don't have is data for income, education, employment, etc., the long form statistics. So still, that gives you a lot of options for things you can analyze. Here's an example of change in school age population using our standardized time series data in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. Here's a nationwide map of population change in urbanized areas. You can see, I guess Murfreesboro grew a great deal between 2000 and 2010. Some interesting places where there was decline: Monterey, California, and of course New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, etc. There's lots of different options with these data. However, if you do need older data before 1990, or you need long form statistics, we do have all of these nominally integrated time series that are available as well. A much larger set because we cover more years and more subjects. So all of these long form statistics are available in our time series. 8 different geographic levels, and that generally covers years from 1970 to 2010. 1970 was the first big digital data product from the census, so that's got a lot more detail in it than earlier years. And we do have time series that go back to 1790 for total population and 1820 for persons by sex. And our long form tables currently are limited to only 2008 to 2012 5-year ACS data for the most recent year. We plan to add more, and it is possible to extend any of our time series by adding your own ACS data to that series. Okay, let's say you're still looking for data to analyze across time, and it is not available in any of our time series. That's where the crosswalks come in, because crosswalks will enable you to allocate data from historical boundaries to current boundaries on your own. So we have a separate web page for that on our site where you can find the geographic crosswalks. And what our crosswalks currently cover, each crosswalk identifies how some set of historical units correspond to some set of 2010 census units. That's what our current crosswalks provide. And the specific set that is available right now, we have crosswalks 1990 to 2010 and 2000 to 2010. And for each of these different pairings of source and target levels, blocks to blocks, and then also block group parts to block groups, census tracts, or counties. Now, you may be wondering why block group parts, or even what are block group parts, and where are the tract crosswalks that I'd really like to use. And before I can explain any of that, I really need to explain what you should be thinking about when you want to find a crosswalk, because there is sort of a logical fallacy that we're all prone to. I think I've done it. Everyone I know who comes and wants to use crosswalks seems to start with this perspective. I want to analyze tract data across time, but the tracts don't match. And we've seen this problem so many times, and a totally natural response is to say, Well, I want a crosswalk then that can let me match up my 1990 tract data with my 2010 tract data. And the problem is that that is the wrong direction to go with your thinking. There's no need, once you've gotten to this point, to keep using the 1990 tract data for anything. What you really want, what you need to do, is you need to choose one of these years' tracts as your analytical unit. You can't use both. If you're going to measure change, you have to do it either in this red area or in each of these green areas, but you can't do both. And once you've chosen one of those 2 years tract, then you no longer need the other year's tract data at all. What you need is you want to find the best possible match for the units that you've chosen. So if I choose 2010 tracts as my target zones, I could use 1990 tract data to match up with that, or I could use block data to match up with that. As I explained earlier, that's what we do for NHGIS time series, and that's really what is available to almost all of you because those block data are available through NHGIS. You can download them just as easily as the 1990 tract data, and then you'll have a much better match with the units that you're interested in. If you want to analyze 2010 tracts, you probably want to get 1990 block data to match up with that, not 1990 tract data. So the general principle that I want to stress is that you generally want to start as small as you can. And if that's block data, great. However, I want to stop to say that a lot of people have been using this other approach because, as I said, it's a pretty straightforward thing to do, to say, I've got tract data, I want to link it together, and there are products available that you may be familiar with that allow you to do that. Namely, the Longitudinal Tract Database, or LTDB, is a product that's available through the Brown University website that actually matches up 1970 through 2010 tract data. And it also includes a crosswalk that allows you to take any tract data from any of those years and allocate it to 2010 tracts. And this has been around for a while, and it's problematic for the reasons that I've been describing. Unfortunately, Social Explorer has also picked this up and used it to produce historical census data for 2010 tracts. And you can see down here, this is the area that I was just looking at a bit ago, and you can see this uniform estimate of % black in this area for all of these 8 2010 tracts there. Well, it just so happens these 8 tracts all correspond to a single 1990 tract. And within that area, in order to estimate, in order to allocate data from the 1990 tract to the 2010 tract, LTDB assumes basically a uniform rate of % black. So you assume 26% black in that entire area, which is a problem, especially if you are concerned, if you're interested in studying something like racial segregation, where you want to know whether there was a sharp divide across these places. But what this is telling you is, well, actually, it would appear that everybody was pretty uniformly spread around. There's not much segregation here. But if you look at the block data and use that as your basis, you get a very, very different story here. So there are some significant risks to simply starting from tract data and bridging from tracts to tracts. You want to really start from the smallest possible units if you can. Looking at the entire Charlotte area here, you can see how the tract-based version has a bunch of these uniform rates spread around, whereas the block-based version of the data really tells you that there was a significant amount of segregation that you can't see using the tract-based data. So that's a cause for concern. How often is that a problem? Just some summary stats. Right here, the % black statistic, comparing NHGIS and LTDB for the entire country. About 1.2% of the time, the 2000 estimate of % black for 2010 tracts differs by at least 10 percentage points between these two products. And in 1990, it differs by 10 percentage points 2.2% of the time. So that's one out of every 50 tracts. That's maybe not a lot, but depending on where you're looking and what you're most interested in, that's a lot of cases where the block-based statistics are significantly different and better than the tract-based. In the most extreme case, we have percent owner-occupied housing, basically the housing ownership rate, which can vary a lot within source tracts. So often there's one part of the tract that has a lot of apartment units and another that has a lot of owner-occupied units, and then you see a lot of variation within the tract, which you can capture if you're using a block basis, but not if you're starting from a whole tract. So just examples of why this is important. I'll skip over a couple of points here, but it's even more extreme when you're looking at total counts rather than rates, population characteristics. When you're looking at total counts, LTDB does okay on 2,000 population counts because they actually do use 2,000 block populations to guide their allocation of 2,000 stats. But once it goes before 2,000, it's a pretty weak model, and there's a lot of discrepancies in their total counts before 2000. So I would use it with great caution. All right, there still is a problem here because block data, as I said before, provides you with only short form counts, only the statistics from the census short form. But if you want the long form data, the income, poverty, education, place of birth kind of data, what are you supposed to do then? Well, you're not limited to either blocks or tracts, of course. There is another level between those two block groups, and there's a lot of long form data that is provided for block groups. Not all of it, but a lot of it is available at the block group level. And in 1990 and 2000, there was an even smaller unit that was used in the long form data reports, what we call block group parts. And that is the intersection between block groups, places, county subdivisions, and urban areas, and congressional districts. So it's big conglomeration of all of these different levels. And you can see a lot of much smaller units than what you can get in the tracts or even the block groups. That's what we want to use at NHGIS to extend our time series to long form data, and that's why we have block group part crosswalks available on our website. How much difference does it make? Well, we saw before how uniform the statistics were if you use a tract basis and how much more precise they were with a block basis. If I calculate the same statistics using a block group basis or a block group part basis, you can see you gradually get closer and closer to this refined statistic, so that the block group part basis gives you data that's almost as precise and accurate as the block basis data, and quite a bit better and more informative than this uniform tract rate. So that's why we have a block group part basis. Similarly, you can see that before I said that 1 out of 50 tracts has a difference between the LTDB and the NHGIS statistic that is greater than 10 for percent black. That rate goes down significantly if you compare NHGIS block basis with a block group part basis. There are very few cases where there's that level of difference. So in general, using a block group part basis is highly reliable. And that's a great thing to use if you really need a long form statistic interpolated across time. So before I mentioned, these are the levels. I'll wrap up here by just quickly going through the rest of this page. I don't have a lot of time. I want to save some time for questions. So what I'm going to do the rest of the way here is just give you a tour of the documentation that's available on our Crosswalk webpage. If you want to use them, there's a lot of guidance here about how to do that. So moving down, the first thing that is discussed is what I just spent the last 10-15 minutes talking about, why you want to use a crosswalk from the lowest possible level. Farther down the page, here's detailed instructions about how to download crosswalks, download required data from NHGIS, join them together, and then allocate data from one set of units to another set of units. Here, this is a series of instructions for how to go from 1990 blocks to 2010 blocks, which you can extend to the 2000 to 2010 case as well. Farther down, this describes how you can use the block-to-block crosswalks to go to any 2010 target unit. So, for example, this describes how to go from 2000 block counts to 2010 school districts. But you could go to 2010 tracts, 2010 metropolitan areas, 2010 urban areas. Any 2010 area is based on 2010 blocks. So the key thing is to first crosswalk from your earlier blocks to 2010 blocks, and then you can group those data up into any larger unit in 2010. And the way you can do that is to download first a 2010 block table file from NHGIS, such as this. And in any NHGIS 2010 block file, we will include all of the codes for almost all other higher levels in the 2010 census. So this is a block file. Each record is a block with a block identifier over here, and you can join this table to the crosswalk, and then you'll also know exactly which tract and block group and place and county subdivision each block was located in, and then you can sum up your data to these areas using this information. Farther down the list, here's instructions for how to use crosswalks from block group parts. A key thing about block group parts is that they are an exceptional type of geographic level, and our default views in NHGIS don't show these levels. So to see them, you need to make sure that you are showing compound geographic levels when you're looking at a geographic level selection interface on our website. Again, this is all detailed here, and you shouldn't have much trouble finding the data you need if you follow these instructions. Farther down, we mentioned that, okay, so our crosswalks only go to 2010 census units, but those 2010 census units are still being used in ACS summary data through today. So all the way up through 2019 files that are coming out next month, most of the census tracts, block groups, and counties that are identified in the 2019 ACS summary files will match the 2010 census tract, block groups, and counties. There are some exceptions, and here's some links to information about those exceptions. None in Tennessee that I know of, so those of you guys focused on Tennessee won't have to worry too much about that issue. You should then be able to use our crosswalks and time series tables to match up directly with more recent ACS data. Interpolation weights. In our block-to-block crosswalks, there's just one interpolation weight. That identifies basically the expected proportion of population and housing that resides both in the source block and in the target block, so that you can multiply that statistic by any block count to get the estimated amount of the block's characteristics that are in that target unit. For block group parts, we list these four different types of weights. A weight by population, a weight for families, for households, and for housing units. So depending on what statistic you're trying to interpolate, for example, if you wanted to interpolate counts of households by income, you could use the household weight. That's based on the blocks within the block group part. And so if there's a bunch of blocks in one part of the block group part that have a lot of households, and then the other blocks have a lot of group quarters population, then the weight for population will differ from the weight for households. But you want to make sure that your household income allocation corresponds to where the households are, not necessarily where the group quarters population is, because the group quarters population doesn't include any household income data. So we give these different options. Farther down, this is what the download interface looks like. You can open up any of these drop downs, and then you'll see there's a national file and individual state level files for each of these different crosswalks. To wrap things up, just some thoughts about where we're going, where we hope to go in the coming years. One of the first things we hope to do is to add all the ACS 5-year periods into our time series tables, that they go up all the way through 2019. And that'll first of all be with the nominally integrated time series tables. But then we also want to include long form data in our standardized time series, and we'll use our block group part crosswalks for that. We just completed these block group part crosswalks this past summer. They came out at the end of August, so we haven't yet done this additional step of extending our standardized time series. Eventually, when the 2020 census data comes out, we will include that in our time series tables. I have no idea what the timeline is going to be on that. We obviously know there's going to be demand for that, and we want to get it out as soon as possible, but we only have so many resources. We'll do our best. So we'll include the 2020 census data, nominally integrated data in nominally integrated tables, and then standardize to 2020 geographic units as well. Eventually, we also plan to include standardized 1980 and 1970 data, but the problem is we don't yet have geographic boundary data for all of those blocks, and we have a major grant underway right now to digitize the 1980 and 1970 blocks so that we can do that. Upcoming plans for crosswalks, we plan to add a lot more crosswalks. Crosswalks that will include, oops, there we go. I accidentally included an extra slide there. Plans for crosswalks include additional crosswalks linking blocks to lots of other target levels so that you don't have to necessarily go download these other identifiers. You can just get a single crosswalk and go from that. More crosswalks going to later units than 2010. To deal with those handful of changes between 2010 and ACS units, we'll just have a crosswalk for those. We want to add things that go up to 2020 once the 2020 geography are available, and also backwards crosswalks to go from the 2020 data back to earlier census units. And once our 1980 and 1970 blocks are available, we'll go forward with those. All right, that's what I have. I want to acknowledge our funding sources here, and just leave it on this page for a moment so that you can see how you can reach out or keep up. I want to mention, we have an application, we have an API for those of you who use those kinds of things. It is possible to request and download NHGIS data entirely at the command line using our API. So here's where you can find out more. Okay, that's all I've got. I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment and open it up to any questions.
Okay, I don't know who want to handle this part, but if you do have a question, please throw it into the chat. We'll get to you. My first question for you, Jonathan, while we're waiting for any questions that might come in, is things when you mentioned like income, for instance, and one of the most common sorts of income measures that people look at is median income, or maybe average household size. Is there, when you're talking about things like averages and medians, are you able to perform those kinds of crosswalks?
That's a really good question. We haven't we haven't worked that out yet. There's two strategies you can use with a median, for example. One, you could start by doing the crosswalk for the counts. Take each count of households by income level and interpolate that, use the crosswalk, and then derive a median from the bins, the bin data, right? So if I know what the distribution is across the bins, I can figure out where the median approximately should be. The other option is a different kind of averaging where you actually need sort of a backward crosswalk. You need, for each target unit, you need to know what percentage of the target unit's households came from each source zone. And we don't have a crosswalk for that yet. That's something we could add. But if you had that, then you can say, well, I'm going to weight the median income 80% from this source zone, 15% from this source zone, and 5% from this source zone. And that requires a backwards crosswalk. You need to know, for each target zone, where did the data come from in the source zones, rather than the other way around. Our current crosswalks are from source zones to target zones for counts. So right now, if you wanted to do that, I think you could, the way you'd have to do it using our crosswalks is to allocate all of the counts for all of the different income levels and then derive a median from that.
I have one other question, and if anyone else wants to ask a question, please feel free to jump in. And that is going back to the geographic standardized time series that you can just download. There's a lot of GIS users that are on this call today. Can they download a shapefile, just a basic set of geography for maybe census tracts or even blocks, attached to a time series and get, like, for instance, the change in population in a ready-to-use sort of format?
Yeah, there's just the extra step. You can download the time series table in a table file, a CSV, and then you download the shape file. And each of those comes with a standard NHGIS identifier. We call them the GIS join identifiers. And so once you download the time series data and the shape file, you just join on the GIS join. We put a G character in front of our all of our identifiers, so that when you load them into Excel or into GIS, they don't change from a character to a number. They're always going to be characters, and that makes it easier to ensure that you're going to be able to join them. And that's it. Once you've done that, you'll still have to, if you want to measure percent change or difference, you'll have to make those calculations yourself. But we do, the 1990 count, the 2000 count, the 2010 count, they're all in the time series. So they're all available and easy to manipulate.
And can you just remind people, like, what the short form counts, the short form data would have included?
Yeah, the short form, the stuff that's available at the block level is race, ethnicity, Hispanic origin, sex, age, tenure, renter versus occupied housing unit, household size, household relationships. So whether it's a married couple family or not. I don't think I've left out anything major that I can think of. It basically, for all of you who've recently filled out your 2020 census form, the information you put into that's what's available at the census block level. The long form is what is now the ACS and has all of that other information available in it.
Let's see, are there any other questions out there? Feel free to unmute, actually, if you'd like to, and ask a question directly to Jonathan. At the State Data Center, if you do need any assistance, we can help. This was kind of a platform neutral sort of presentation in terms of how you might actually conduct the steps to join up the tables and do the crosswalk. We've run through this using Excel and ArcGIS Pro and have gotten a little bit of experience, but we can probably walk you through the kind of the theoretically how to do this sort of thing.
Tim,
I'm seeing questions in the chat.
We got any questions?
I'll take the last one here. Somebody asked why you don't add a column for FIPS and GeoIDs in your tables. The answer is we do include them, not in all of our tables, and we're working on that. In the crosswalks specifically, for our block-to-block crosswalks, we have different crosswalks. Some that whether you want GIS join, that's one crosswalk, or GeoID, that's a different crosswalk. Those files are so huge that we didn't even want to put both of those columns there, but we do have GeoID crosswalks for blocks. We didn't do it for block group parts because there's not a lot of sources of block group part data, and we just assumed that you'd probably be getting the data from NHGIS. So we did GIS join there. In our shape files, most of our shape files our newer shapefiles have GeoID, our older ones don't. And similarly, in our table data, we plan to add GeoIDs. We've been hiding it, not for a good reason. It's not a good reason. We just figured this out. We're going to re-add that in, so those will be available sometime, hopefully in the next few months.
There's one more question, yeah, about how current is, for the people on the phone, how current is your community data in your products?
So by community, you know, we have standard census summary levels. So community could be a place, a census place is an incorporated place, or a census designated place. Those generally correspond to communities. And our data is up to the most recent American Community Survey. The 2019 one-year ACS just came out in September, but that is only for places of 65,000 or more. The 5-year ACS data comes out next month, and that will be for all places, all census tracts, all block groups. And we will add that as soon as we can. We usually get it in within 4 weeks of the census release. So I hope by the holidays, if there aren't any big surprises, we'll have our 5-year data out by the holidays.
Okay. I think that's going to wrap it up as far as the state data center side. Michael, do you want to close out on your end?
No, this is great. I recommend this platform to all of my students with the projects that we work on. We use this data extensively for our lab assignments. It's very, very convenient. I love the fact that there's a GIS join column, because I no longer have to worry about dropping all those leading zeros and all that sort of thing, because I used to have to write like schema.ini files. Yeah, I don't have to do any of that. It's so nice. So thank you all for the work that you do.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoy sharing this stuff.
Again, yes, and thank you. And apologize for mispronunciation. I actually listened to one of your videos from another webinar that you did beforehand, but still got it wrong. So my apologies to you there.
No worries.
Time, when we have you back, we'll get it right. And next time, hopefully, we can do it in person. Again, please sign up for the newsletters to keep in touch with both TNGIC and with the State Data Center. Special thanks to TNGIC for partnering with this. As you can tell, they're really good at doing this at this point, having done their conference online and other series of webinars. So special thanks to Sam, to Paul, and to Michael. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to do it.
All right. Jonathan,
okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.